It's time for Parts in the Sum of the Whole. A weekly podcast designed to inform the masses on just about any topic you can think of. We always encourage your comments, so drop us a line. And now, from our world headquarters in Bidwell, Ohio, here's the philosopher monk, Ronnie Glenn, and the Vance man, Brian Vance.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow. You know what? I don't want the attention on us, Ronnie. The attention is on America this week as we celebrate Independence Day weekend. Independence Day, period.
Well, yeah. It usually ends up taking over a few days.
Can you tell me how many candles are on America's cake?
No.
Count them. Right, here's the cake. 237. We need the fire marshal. Now, yeah, America's celebrating the 237th birthday this week, and, happy Independence Day, everyone. We've got an Independence-themed show. We have some White House trivia that you probably have never heard of. Also, you're going to be featuring some stuff from our Founding Fathers, a little thing that you found.
You kind of got to pay your respects
to
that group around this time of year.
Right.
Plus, they get their own day.
And our trivia question this week is kind of centered around July 4th
in a weird, morbid kind of way.
Morbid kind of way. Before we start the show officially, I want everyone to listen to something here.
We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. To ourselves and our posterity do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America, for the United States of America.
Now, who remembers that? Schoolhouse Rock, the preamble to the Constitution. You know, Ronnie, when that was on in the 70s, when I was growing up, that was the actual way that I learned the preamble to the Constitution.
I learned, and when I say learned, finally memorized the preamble. We had to memorize it in school, but I learned it before that in the fact that it had a 1,500 or a 2,000 piece jigsaw puzzle that was the first page of the United States Constitution, and I'd put it together and I'd hot glued it and stuff and made a wall poster size kind of hanging up out of it. But it was of the Constitution. I put it all together, and that's how I memorized it, because I had to study each little individual jigsaw puzzle to see where it fit, and by the end of it I had read all the words.
Wow, that's amazing. It's funny how people learn things, but I think in song, whenever it's probably easier to recall in a song. To this day, I remember that tune, and then the words just go right with it.
On a side note, maybe we should send Congress the Schoolhouse Rock about how a bill becomes a bill.
Yes, and we'll feature that.
Maybe
next
they just
week.
Don't know. That's why they can't do. That's why nothing's getting done. They just don't know how the bills become bills.
How it works, yeah.
Yeah.
I've decided, Ronnie, that this week I'm not going to have a dirty laundry segment on the show because, well, it's America's birthday. I don't want to cloud, the major topics of the news, that a lot has gone on this week, plus our celebration of America. I just don't want to clutter it up with some dirty laundry. So we'll save it for next week.
I guess that makes sense, but
out of respect.
You just started a new series last week, and I've only had one.
Yeah, but, I didn't realize America's birthday. Well, I did, but I just, So we'll start it up again next week.
Well, yeah.
It's
another good segment falls to the laws of scheduling.
It's out of respect. You know what I'm saying? Last week, our trivia question was name at least 2 lawmakers who voted against the Patriot Act. And
turns out there was a lot more than I thought.
Well, yeah, there was one senator who voted no.
Right.
And then 66 House members voted no.
Right.
And you only had to list 2, but here's some of the ones that were notable. Okay. From the House, Sherrod Brown of Ohio.
Yeah.
Dennis Kucinich of Ohio. Ron Paul from Texas. Bernie Sanders. Nick Rahall from West Virginia. Those are just some notable representatives. And then the senator that voted no was Russ Feingold of Wisconsin.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. So that was a good question, though, last week.
Well, I try.
This week, a chance for you to win a Subway gift card. Subway, eat fresh, some good food there. I'm always ready to eat at Subway at any point in time.
I worked there for 5 years, and I'm always ready to eat at Subway.
Yes, you know their little secrets.
Well,
you know the 11 herbs and spices recipe. No, that's KFC.
Yeah, I know how to bake bread.
Okay.
Lots and lots of bread.
Lots and lots of bread. Okay, well, anyway, some good food from Subway coming up in our trivia question, and we'll give you all the details on the rules and how to play a little bit later on.
Yeah.
Ronnie, you and I had a chance to sit down with Eric Harrison out of Chicago, who's a former Gallia County resident here.
He sounded like a pretty nice guy.
Yes, we sat down with him. He gave us at least 20 good minutes of interview.
Yeah.
And instead of put it on the show here, what I want to do is tell you all about it, where to find it, and I want the entire interview to air, so it will be up on our site as well as a separate option. We spoke about his roommate, Richard Pryor Jr., which, of course, is Richard Pryor's son, and he's on a separate mission in life, but he goes into everything, how he got started and where he hopes to end up. So anyway, look for our Eric Harrison interview up on our site as well, partsinthesum.com. Ronnie, a lot has gone on this week, and we might as well get right into it. 2 landmark decisions by the Supreme Court.
Oh, yeah. They sent various aspects of the entire country up in arms for, well, I guess it would depend on which side of the argument you were on, but either way, they were controversial. The first one that happened this week, it was announced that they had struck down a provision of the Voting Rights Act that was passed back in 1965.
Now, what exactly did that mean?
It was back around the times when they passed the Civil Rights Act in 64, and they had to pass the Voting Rights Act in 65 to give the minorities and African Americans in the South, and it is set down in law, who had the right to vote, and also set down provisions keeping states from being able to keep people from voting. And there was a provision in it because this was the South mainly was the ultimate reason this provision was put in, but the provision that was struck down was a part of the law that said that if your state has a history of trying to pass laws and regulations that make it harder for minorities and immigrants and stuff to vote, then before you can enact these laws that you want to pass, whether or not it's voter ID laws we heard a lot about last year, those fall under that kind of thing, redistricting, stuff like that, before those states could do this, they had to check with the federal government first, because the states had a history of being discriminatory in its voting legislation towards minorities. And
wouldn't that be the way you want it, though? I mean, just to make sure there's a check and balance to the system?
Well, yeah, and it worked. It wasn't just passed in 65 and then it was forgot about. They had to renew it every so often. And the last time it came up for renewal, it passed unanimously. It has every other time, Nobody wants to be the person who voted against, the Voting Rights Act. But Georgia brought a case that ended up coming to the Supreme Court, and the ultimate outcome of that case was that they struck down the provision that said that these states that fell under this clause in the Voting Rights Act, where they had to get federal approval before they can enact these laws and regulations they wanted to enact, had to get federal approval. They don't have to get federal approval anymore, which means that they can write these laws and implement them, and the federal government doesn't get to check them first. You have to wait until an election's already gone by and some voters felt they had been discriminated against. Federal government doesn't get to look at it until after an election, when somebody's been damaged by the fact that these regulations were passed that otherwise these states wouldn't have gotten to pass. And you're right. Last year, the Supreme Court opinion in the ruling said, their main argument about it was that times have changed since 1965 when the original legislation was passed. But it really hasn't. I mean, in last year's presidential election in 2012, the federal government ruled that a voter ID law in Texas was discriminatory and said Texas couldn't implement it. Florida tried to purge a lot of minorities and stuff from their roles in the 2012 election, and we had to tell them they couldn't do it. South Carolina in late 2011 had been told that they couldn't implement a voter ID law because it was discriminatory. And those are 3 of the states that fell under that clause in the Voting Rights Act. And to say that times have changed since 1965 is completely ludicrous when we had to stop these 3 states
just
less than
a
year ago.
Yeah,
and those are just 3 states. But they left open and almost called for Congress to fix the legislation, to come up with a different way to determine which states would fall under these provisions, to write new provisions whatsoever, whatever. But the right said yay, the left said boo, and immediately, the very next day after this ruling, those states that were hampered, in their opinion, by this clause when it was still in effect, as soon as it wasn't in effect anymore, the day after the Supreme Court handed down this decision, they immediately went to introduce all this legislation that the federal government wouldn't let them do before, and said before that it had been discriminatory. There's Texas with and South Carolina with the voter ID and Florida with the voter purge, they basically rushed back to resubmit that legislation for their legislatures to pass, even though the federal government's already ruled that it's discriminatory, but because they don't have to submit it to the federal government before it's passed as law and implemented, the federal government has to wait until after somebody suffers because of these discriminatory practices before they can go back and tell the states that they can't do it. One of the most recent elections that showed what kind of effect something can have would be the 2000 election.
Oh, yeah.
Where, the judicial branch gave the election to Gore. What if we'd have been able to check that before they handed it down?
Mm-hmm. So how long do we see Congress maybe working on this kind of revision to the Voting Rights Act? Is it going to take forever?
Oh, man, the Congress can't even do anything now. Like, I don't think that even if there were people that submitted bills to be voted on and whatnot, that it would have any more of a chance to get done than anything else that is currently or has been before Congress.
Well, before we get to the other big landmark Supreme Court ruling this week, and we're talking about John Boehner and the House. The Senate voted on the immigration bill this past week, and now it's going to the House, and John Boehner is saying that he's not going to pass that legislation. They're going to rework it and get the majority of Republicans in the House to support it.
The House is not going to take up and vote on whatever the Senate passes. We're going to do our own bill through regular order, and it'll be legislation that reflects the will of our majority and the will of the American people.
It wasn't that he wouldn't pass it. He wouldn't even allow it to be put to a vote unless beforehand half of the Republicans supported it beforehand.
Okay, so this is going to spin out in the House for a long time. Can't Boehner lose his seat if he just...
Well, he's made this promise, and it's based on a principle that is an unofficial principle, but it was established that the half of the majority party supporting a bill kind of falls under, but it passed the Senate with bipartisan support. There were like 18 Republicans in the Senate that voted for it. It got more than a supermajority. But the House is a different question. Even though there was Republicans that supported it in the Senate, the Tea Party plays a much bigger presence in the Republican Party as it stands in the House. And they're going to be totally against it. Even if half of them supported immigration, they would never pass a bill just handed to them from the Senate. They would want to make all these modifications anyways, which means that even if they passed it, because of the modifications they made, it would have to go back to the Senate for a pass.
Yes.
President Obama wants them to pass it before they go on their August break, which between their July 4th break, and they always take the month of August off, there's only like 3 weeks in there, and
it's
that's
not
just
going to happen.
Yeah, unrealistic to think that Republicans themselves, even if it was a bill they wrote, could pass anything in 3 weeks.
Well, number one, the immigration bill is very important right now. It's a hot topic.
I think another thing that hurt him is Lindsey Graham came out and said that he thinks that Republicans should, support this immigration bill because of the numbers. They're going to lose what little Latinos they have if they don't vote for it. Boehner's in a tight position because he made this promise when he said publicly that he wouldn't let it go to a vote unless half the Republicans in the House supported it. I don't think he's going to get half of the Republicans in the House to support it. And if he says, okay, scrap that, we have enough combined out of the Democrats and whatever Republicans that would support it, I'm going to go ahead and put it to a vote. I think the Republicans will strip him of his speakership.
We're going to go home for the recess next week and listen to our constituents. And when we get back, we're going to have a conference on July the 10th to have a discussion about the way forward. I don't want to make any predictions on what the outcome of that conversation is going to be, but we're going to have a conversation and determine a pathway forward.
Well, he's already on thin ice. I mean, it was just a few weeks ago that there was an article out that some of the Republican leaders made a press release that they had, done some soul searching and talked to God over the weekend, and God said that they shouldn't take Boehner out of his leadership position, and that's the only reason he's stayed Speaker of the House. So he's already on thin ice. I think the first time he doesn't do exactly what the Republican Party wants him to do, they'll strip him of it anyway. So I say, why not go out on a high note, get this passed? He can pass it. If he puts it to a vote, I'm sure that there will be enough Republicans to add to the Democratic Party votes to pass the bill that came from the Senate. But I don't think they're going to. They're definitely not going to in the 3-week window they have. And by the time they come back, there will be some other big issue that they'll use as justification for not, working on this immigration bill.
A lot going on there on the Hill, and we'll see what happens after the big break here. Yeah, it's all politics. We're going to take a quick time out. When we come back on our Independence Day show, we're going to talk about the second big landmark decision by the Supreme Court this past week, and also tell you about some anti-abortion bill action in Texas and a filibuster that went on for 11 hours. It's all on the way here on Parts in the Sum of the Whole.
Wildfires burn millions of acres each year. And each year, wildland firefighters like Fire Chief James Hall battle to contain them. But they can't do it alone.
A single ember that escapes from a wildfire can travel more than a mile. It can ignite and destroy your home, your community, or more. That single ember can be just as dangerous as the wildfire itself. But you can do something firefighters can't. You can act now to prepare your home and your community for wildfire. You can reduce the risk. Do your part. Go to fireadapted.org.
Get fire adapted. Learn what you can do now to reduce wildfire damage later at fireadapted.org. A public service message brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council. Learn more at fireadapted.org.
Welcome back to our Independence Day edition of Parts in the Sum of the Whole. We certainly do appreciate you listening, all of our faithful listeners every week, and we need more. So make sure you share with your friends.
Sharing's always good.
Yeah, and tell them to join our group. We've got a group page on Facebook, and we have partsinthesum.com.
Right.
That's our website. And a brand new phone number, 415-PSW News. You can get a hold of us with news ideas or just say hi. A chance for you to win a Subway gift card in our trivia question a little bit later on the show. And before we leave the show today, since it's the birthday of America, we have very special guests, the United States Marine Corps Band, going to be performing the Star Spangled Banner right before we leave the show. So
I never would have thought they would play that.
Yes. And you know what? They've played that more than once.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
It's the President's own.
You just never think,
band.
Some bands are going to take some directions that do.
I think it's a tune that a lot of folks might not hear that often.
Well, how they're going to know what it is when it's playing then?
Well, just listen to it. I'm sure you'll be able to recall it because you've heard it at some point in your life. It used to be when we were staying up too late and how television stations would sign off.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a long time ago.
And then turn to snow. I'm dating us.
I haven't seen...
We're old people.
I haven't seen a sign-off since, like, the early 90s.
No, everything's 24 hours
I don't know
a day.
why they signed off for 2 hours, just to not be on the air for 2 hours.
Yeah, typically at midnight they would go off the air and then come back on around 4:30, 5:30 in the morning.
Oh, when I saw them, it was Fox. They would go off the air at 4 o'clock, and then they'd be right back at 6 o'clock in the morning with Woody Woodpecker.
Some stayed on past midnight, yeah.
Well, Fox had the late movies.
Right, they did, yeah. So, anyway, we reminisce a little bit.
Yeah.
That's okay.
We're old and I'm a geek, so deal with it.
All right. Well, here we go again. The Supreme Court, a landmark decision and a great one. A lot of folks excited about this one.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about it, Ronnie.
Well, it's basically a victory for gay marriage and also the striking down of the Defense of Marriage Act that Clinton signed into law back in the 90s. The Supreme Court argued that the plaintiffs against Prop 8 in California, which made same-sex marriage legal in California, there was an injunction against it, and that's the case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that the people trying to stop the legalization of gay marriage had really no standing to bring the case since they couldn't prove that they'd suffered any damages or anything along the way, and that for the government to say that some relationships are more deserving or of better standing was discriminatory, it basically struck down DOMA in the process too. And that kind of got the opposite reaction of the voting rights thing. The right they have been ever since the ruling came down decrying this. Gohmert used his usual end of the week rant on the chamber floor to say that because the Supreme Court struck down the Defense of Marriage Act that there was really no good reason why we should still be able to enforce laws against polygamy and bestiality and whatnot. But yeah, it's just the typical right reaction.
He actually went into that?
Yeah. that guy.
Well,
but the left
it's good
has all
C-SPAN
been
watching.
celebrating this, and just as the same as the states in the voting rights thing rushed out to reenact all these laws that they couldn't before, they didn't think they were going to get to, even though on the day that the decision was released, as soon as it came off the press, he said that the intern said the paper was still warm in his hands. He ran 5 blocks through New York City down to a court where there was a hearing in process that had to do with a gay couple, and one of them was a citizen of a South American country. I forget exactly which one it was, but he was going to be deported. And normally, if you have married a U.S. citizen, you get to stay in the United States, but they were a same-sex couple, so this guy was going to get deported. And this intern ran the printout of the ruling all the way down to that court and handed it to the judge, and the judge flipped through it and looked at, of course the judge knows which section he needs to look at, so he flipped right to it, and the deportation got stopped. They still have to,
right after that.
yeah,
I mean, it was just,
they still have to, go through the case, and argue everything about the green card and whatever, but because the Supreme Court struck down this thing, the same-sex partner didn't get deported because he was married to a U.S. citizen.
and it was just in time.
Yeah. The surprising thing, though, was that most legal experts would say that, it would take about 25 days or so for the ruling about same-sex marriage to filter down through the lower courts and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the Attorney General, the state of California, took a chance, and the next day submitted a brief to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and whatnot, and they immediately overturned it, and way faster than the Attorney General thought they would have. So the very next day, starting 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, gay marriage started happening in California. The Attorney General ordered the court clerks to start issuing marriage licenses. The Attorney General herself even presided over one of the marriages. Rachel Maddow played one of the first live same-sex marriage ceremonies on her show, and
wow,
there's just
yay all around.
Yeah, good for them, man.
Good for them. And then also this past week, Texas has its own little thing going on because we had an anti-abortion bill filibuster in the state house.
As a bit of backstory, when all these states this year have been passing, mandatory ultrasound legislation and all these things that go against women's rights and justification for anti-abortion stances and whatnot, Texas said that it wasn't going to do that because, they were going to work on issues that had to do with the state, and that was really popular at the time, and they didn't through their general session earlier in the year. But then Rick Perry called a special session, and this is what they did, an anti-abortion bill. But Wendy Davis said, you're not going to ram this through just because, there's a Republican majority. Mm-hmm. And she had to, like you said, the filibuster regulations are different. You have to stand there for the entire time. You can't sit down. You can't touch the podium. You can't even take a bathroom break. You can't just speak about anything and read the phone book. You have to be on topic, or else the filibuster ends. Rick Perry called a special session to do this anti-abortion bill, and Wendy Davis was determined to filibuster it. She came with tennis shoes and everything, prepared to stand for 13 hours that she had to kill until the special legislative session ended at midnight, and she made it to a little after 11 o'clock. She did an admirable job, but the protesters in the chamber caused such an uproar that it killed the final half hour or so, and when they finally got a vote to be entered into the record, it came slightly after midnight. They thought that they lost. There's even a bit of controversy over the fact that there was a time change in the computer record of it that made it seem like, it had happened 24 hours beforehand or whatever, and that meant it would have passed and whatnot. But they're not going to even let, Republicans are all about letting the people speak. A lot of people spoke in Texas on this, and the anti-abortion bill didn't get passed. So Rick Perry just went on to say some really chauvinistic things about Wendy Davis and announced that he's just going to call a second legislative session to revisit this bill again.
Well, we have one of those little comments from him right now.
Even the woman who filibustered the Senate the other day was born into difficult circumstances. She was the daughter of a single woman. She was a teenage mother herself. She managed to eventually graduate from Harvard Law School and serve in the Texas Senate. It's just unfortunate that she hasn't learned from her own example.
So, yeah, I mean, he's sort of he's digging himself a hole, I think, by doing this.
Well,
the way he's kind of downing her.
I don't think that they can really try to make it seem like it's anything but what it is. And I think the fact that there's so much attention being focused on her personally, that the story of what's happened with this legislation in Texas gets out to the wider public. But Texas isn't the only state trying to do this. There's a big measure that's almost as medievally restrictive as the Texas one going on right now in Ohio. And there's other states that are trying, with Republican majority legislatures that are trying to pass, almost exact same copies.
Plus, speaking of Texas, the 500th execution.
Oh,
They
yeah.
reached a milestone.
Boy, Texas is just way up there on the moral charts this week, man. Not only was it their 500th execution, but I think symbolically it was a woman. Texas, we like to kill people.
The George Zimmerman trial underway this week, day 5, back on Friday there, so we'll kind of fill you in on what happened this week on that.
We won't tell you the knock-knock joke.
Yeah, that they opened the trial with, the defense attorney. Opened the murder trial with a knock-knock joke.
And you should be grateful for that.
Yes, and be happy that you didn't catch it.
You know what? We're lying to you. I think I'm going to play it for you anyways. You got to hear it.
Oh, yeah, okay, so we'll start the next segment with that here in a little
So
bit.
ha.
All right, and also a chance to win some great Subway food. We're going to give you some White House fun facts, also as part of our America's Birthday Celebration show here on Parts and the Sum of the Whole. Stay tuned.
Together now, we can make it better now. Come on, can we do it?
Yeah, you know that we can.
We rope it up,
cause we know how to jump.
we roll it out,
We know how to skate.
we'll cut it down,
We know what to eat.
we'll swap it out.
We eat healthy stuff.
Just moving a little and eating better every day can help make you and your kids healthier. Search We Can online to find doable tips and activities that you can use every day. That's We Can, a message from the Ad Council, HHS, and NIH's We Can program.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to the Parts and the Sum of the Whole, our July 4th edition, as we move into the month of July starting tomorrow. Some fun facts about the White House. Did you know that there are 132 rooms, 35 bathrooms, 6 levels in the residence, also 412 doors, 147 windows, 28 fireplaces, 8 staircases, 3 elevators, and maybe, if you look hard enough, a partridge in the pear tree outside.
Should the Secret Service be a little worried that you have all these specifications?
Hey, it's between me and Nat Geo.
Oh, well, maybe the Secret Service should be worried that they have all these specifications.
That's right. Did you know that at various times in history, the White House has been known as the President's Palace, the President's House, and the Executive Mansion?
I knew about the Executive Mansion.
President Theodore Roosevelt officially gave the White House its current name in 1901.
Back when Andrew Jackson was president in his first inauguration, people with muddy boots and stuff, raucous, we would call them hillbillies now, stormed the White House in celebration that Jackson had won the presidency, and they were stepping all over, sat in upholstered chairs and
nice.
curtains with muddy boots and all this other stuff. It was crazy. You could just walk up. I mean, back in those days, you could walk up and knock on the front door of the White House. Not like today with defense and the Secret Service and, the 50 caliber machine guns on the roof and whatnot.
Now, Ronnie, if President Obama hired you to paint the White House, how many gallons of paint do you think it would take to cover the outside of the White House?
Oh, crap. I didn't even know there was 132 rooms.
I would say, okay, I'll give you just a kind of a window.
One coat or
two?
two? I don't have an answer either way, but one coat or two.
We're talking about just one coat. And it's above 400 gallons and below 600.
I'll say 500 then.
Well, close. 570 gallons to
That's
cover
a little
the entire
closer to
outside.
6. You could have said between 500 and 600.
So you better make sure that Sherwin-Williams has a sale on that stuff before you go buying a 570 gallons.
That's the government. Aren't you allowed to wastefully spend?
Well, sure. Yeah, we can use one of their quote-unquote credit cards.
Yeah.
Like the IRS. I learned it from the IRS.
Well, there you go.
Follow the example, right?
I suppose so.
All right.
Don't want to set one yourself, then you're responsible for something.
The White House kitchen is able to serve dinner to as many as 140 guests and hors d'oeuvres to more than 1,000. Hors d'oeuvres are more important anyway.
Man, so there's a ceiling to the limit about how many people can be invited to a state dinner? You would think that the limit would be more than 140.
You would think so.
What if you wanted to have representatives from every country on Earth? There's like 180, 190 countries.
They would never do that.
Yeah, screw
It's
you,
something
Earth.
you can't do.
You can only do 140.
Otherwise, you'd have to have it at a convention center.
I'm sorry.
Not the White House.
Tiny nation of Tongo, you're not on the list.
Presidential first while in office, President James Polk from 1845 to 49, was the first president to have his photo taken. President Theodore Roosevelt in 1901 to 09 was not only the first president to ride in an automobile, but also the first president to travel outside the country when he visited Panama.
He built the Panama Canal.
Yes, was responsible for that. President Franklin Roosevelt, 33 to 45, was the first president to ride in an airplane. Maybe you can recall some of these instances, some of the things that have occurred or gone wrong on the White House property, including some fires, plane crashes, and different things like that. In September of 94, at 1:49 a.m. in the morning, an unlicensed pilot guided a Cessna down over the treetops of the White House over the south lawn where it bounced off the grass just short of the White House. He crashed through the branches of the magnolia tree planted by Andrew Jackson. He planted that tree and came to rest in a crumpled heap 2 stories below the Clintons' unoccupied bedroom.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. Everybody's freaking out because it was, I mean, the first attack on the World Trade Center was in '93 when they, set off a bomb in the bottom. I remember when the plane crashed, the first thing was, was it trying to hit the White House?
Yes.
Because it's just a little weird that you come down in the front yard, or the backyard, whatever yard it was. It was a yard.
Right.
It's just a little weird that, out of all the airspace in the world, you come down on the front lawn of the White House.
And then Lincoln had 2 special advisors who slept in the White House so that the president could seek their counsel in the wee hours of the morning. Some say this made his wife Mary very jealous, as they spent more time with the president than she did. And ever since his death, many believe to this day that his ghost haunts the White House. And in fact, it's widely believed Lincoln has had premonitions of the assassination.
There's always stories like that. You wonder how much they got invented after the fact, because nobody could think of saying something like this and then something not happen, but after something happens, everybody goes, oh, wait a minute, before it happened I thought of this, or I saw this, blah. My favorite story about people staying in the White House was when Roosevelt was there and Winston Churchill had come over on a visit while they were planning cooperation in World War II and whatnot, and it was all very casual back then still. And Franklin Roosevelt went to Winston Churchill's room and knocked on the door and went in. Franklin Roosevelt was in a wheelchair because he had polio and whatnot. Well, there's 2 different versions. Either Franklin went in or he got to the door as Churchill was coming out, and Churchill was butt naked, just a towel over his shoulder, and Roosevelt was like, oh, I'm sorry, Winston, forgive me, blah blah, and he's like, Churchill was supposed to have said something to the effect of, not at all, don't think anything about it, the King's Prime Minister has nothing to hide from the American president.
Including his...
No, that's right, yeah, that's my favorite story about somebody staying in the White House.
And so I want to thank Nat Geo for the fun facts about the White House.
They run a good channel, too.
Yes, they do. And you have something from the History Channel that you're going to share with us a little bit later on about the Founding Fathers. Some real cute information.
Yeah.
It's really neat. So, turning back to news of the day, Edward Snowden still pretty much, that story's just pretty much stopped in its tracks. He's in limbo. He's in
a, quote, transit area of the airport in Moscow, which is why Putin, which is the reason Putin keeps giving the United States for why, he can't turn him over, even though they made requests. He says, he's in this transit area. He hasn't stepped out of the transit area, so officially, he hasn't stepped on Russian soil yet, so I can't do anything. And that's the way international airports work. There are, specific little areas, like Tom Hanks in that movie, the Terminal. But yeah, as far as we know right now, Snowden's still in Russia. I still don't see how he could be getting on a commercial flight to get out of Russia without a passport, because the United States yanked his passport last weekend.
It'll be interesting to see how he gets to anywhere.
Apparently the best candidate for where he's trying to go at the moment seems to be Ecuador, and there seems to have been, a petition for political asylum in Ecuador. The politicians from Congress and the vice president and the president have all, been reported as telling Ecuador not to do it, even so far as we found out from the Ecuadorian president when he ranted about it. We found out that we've even tried to persuade Ecuador not to give him asylum by threatening economic relations, and we found out about this pressuring when the Ecuadorian president went on a rant publicly in a speech saying that, Ecuador wouldn't participate, be forced by this kind of blackmail. And he said, he basically said, you can keep your money. You're not going to blackmail us with it. We have all right economic relations with Ecuador, but apparently not so strong that we should think that we can automatically tell them what they're going to do. They're just not important enough to the Ecuadorians to be able for us to use them as blackmail. And you got to respect Ecuador for that.
Once he does leave, if he leaves on a commercial jet, is there somebody somewhere in a black ops, CIA, they're watching Snowden?
Oh, I don't doubt it.
Okay, and once he's in international airspace, can they shoot that down? Can they apprehend him? Can they do something?
Well,
I
they
know
couldn't
won't
shoot
admit
down a
it.
commercial airliner.
I know they wouldn't admit it if they did it.
They can't shoot down a commercial airliner. I think one of the precedents that has been set that was that back in the 80s, they utilized the 6th Fleet, 7th Fleet, Navy, whatever fleets in the Mediterranean, to force down a commercial airliner that had some terrorists that had taken a cruise ship hostage and ended up getting to go to Egypt, and they ended up leaving Egypt on a commercial airliner, and naval fighter jets were sent up to scramble and forced it down to an airport in Italy. But the president said, when he was asked at a press conference this week, said he wasn't going to scramble any jet fighters to try to get a 29-year-old hacker. So whether or not that's going to end up to be the case, and whether or not Obama took that option off the table, remains to be seen. But that's the public position of our president at the moment anyways.
Well, Edward Snowden's father has been speaking out too, and he said he did betray his government, but he didn't betray the American people.
Which I think is a good clarification. I'm not anti-Semitic at all. I'm not racist or discriminatory against anybody. The problems I have with, for example, Israel. I don't have a problem with Jews or Israelis. I have a problem with what their government does. I'm an American. I love America. I don't have a problem with its people other than at specific times for specific reasons, and it's mainly in the way they treat other people. But I have had occasion to have a problem with our government. The government operates in the name of the people, but you can't hold the people responsible for what the government does, because it's shown to us all over the world time and time again that even when it's supposed to be a democratic government run for the people, by the people, blah, 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 that the government does a lot of things that it doesn't want its people to know it does, but the world sees as done in the name of the people. And that's why we get into a lot of the trouble that we have. We couldn't figure out why the world hated us enough for a group of people to take down the Twin Towers on 9/11, but you look at history and look at what we do in the world from news. Europe had a very good idea. They could see why we were attacked. The American press doesn't tell the American people the same news that Europe just, on page 3 tells the European people. They had access to the knowledge, and we didn't. So there's a difference between governments and the people. Our people are supposed to run our government, but I think the outrage over the secret surveillance and all this other stuff would be apparent to anybody that, our government does a lot of stuff that we wouldn't agree with them doing, which is why they have to keep it secret.
Well, the very latest in the George Zimmerman trial, first of all, before we kind of cover what happened this week, at the very beginning, the opening day, his lawyer opens the trial with
a knock-knock
joke. Let's hear it.
Okay.
Sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying. So let me, at considerable risk, let me say, I'd like to tell you a little joke. I know how that may sound a bit weird in this context under these circumstances, but I think you're the perfect audience for it. As long as you if you don't like it or you don't think it's funny or inappropriate, that you don't hold it against Mr. Zimmerman. You can hold it against me if you want, but not Mr. Zimmerman. I have your assurance you won't. Here's how it goes. Knock, knock. Who's there? George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman, who? All right, good. You're on the jury. Nothing? That's funny. After what you folks have been through the last 2 or 3 weeks?
Now, but
I think you'll agree that it wasn't funny.
No, it wasn't at all.
You see the video when you see them playing this clip on the on TV or whatnot. You see Zimmerman, and I'm just surprised that when he hears this, like they had to talk about it, because Zimmerman's not surprised at all. And if it would have been me and I'd have heard the joke and the way it went, I'd have been some inclined to oh my God, I can't believe he's doing this kind of reaction. But Zimmerman just sits there.
Right, he sits there straight-faced.
Like they had planned this all out, and Zimmerman can't figure out why the jury's not laughing either. That's what it looks like.
But as a person maybe in the jury pool or just watching it or sitting in the courtroom, after he finished that knock-knock joke, I'm just thinking, what kind of a clown does he have for representation?
Has any...
Can he possibly use this in an appeal someday or some way?
If he gets convicted, it's going to come back to appeal. I mean, that's just always the way it's going to go. The lawyer files the motion for the appeal before they even leave the courthouse on the day he's convicted.
Yeah.
It's just the way it goes. And he's got a lawyer that has done some crazy stuff, this being one of them, and you just got to think he probably realizes he's going to get convicted. Maybe his lawyer's they're looking at this as a strategy to be able to say, well, I had incompetent representation, and that's grounds for appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Why would a lawyer, in a murder case at all, why would a lawyer, especially the defense lawyer, open up the defense of his client with a knock-knock joke?
Isn't that comparable, though, to Johnny in the O.J. Simpson trial when he said, if the glove don't fit,
No, that was well into it. Just because the way he made his point rhymed isn't the same at all as Zimmerman's lawyer telling a knock-knock joke. Shake my head, and that's all I can do with this.
Well, 2 neighbors and a police officer gave accounts Friday, which seemed to bolster the Neighborhood Watch volunteers' contention that he was on his back and being straddled by Trayvon Martin during the confrontation. Neighbor Jonathan Good said it appeared the unarmed teen was straddling Zimmerman, while another neighbor, Jonathan Manalo, said Zimmerman seemed credible when he said immediately after the fight that he had shot Martin in self-defense. And Officer Tim Smith testified that Zimmerman's backside was covered in grass and wetter than his front side. So all 3 were called as witnesses for prosecutors, and of course they're trying to convict him of that second-degree murder charge. So
but there's also a blow to the defense when another key witness took back his claim that he had seen Trayvon throw a punch.
So we'll have more details on that as we move closer.
I'm
Jodi
sure
Arias'
we'll.
trial gets underway again July 18th, so we'll talk more about that next week. But her attorneys have asked a judge to vacate the jury's decision in her murder trial.
They agreed that she was guilty. They agreed that she should be punished. The jury that she had couldn't agree on which punishment she could get, life without parole or the death penalty. If they couldn't agree on something, the judge could always rule life with no parole, and yet they vacate the jury, want to bring another one in for sentencing, want to now redo the whole trial? When there was never any confusion about what the verdict should have been, the confusion was in what the sentencing should have been. If nothing else, the least she should be able to get is life without parole. I mean, that was the lesser of the 2 options. They couldn't agree on the death penalty.
All right,
Arizona's messed up, man.
Well, let's see here. We have trivia coming up, so get ready to win a Subway gift card.
Fun, fun, fun.
Yeah, and it's all coming up next here on Parts and the Sum of the Whole.
In today's world, it's easy to get tunnel vision with current happenings. You can get lost in the confusion. On our weekly podcast, Parts in the Sum of the Whole, we take the whole picture and break it down to understand the parts of the story in the context you should know. We dig for the truth and try to find facts that some try to hide. We are not a political show or a news show, but we will discuss topics or headlines that are important to you. In general, Parts in the Sum of the Whole is the place to go to find out about everything. Tell your friends and join us each Sunday. Check us out at partsinthesum.com, on Facebook at facebook.com/partsinthesum, on Twitter at partsinthesum, or email us info@partsinthesum.com. And thanks for listening. Get ready for this week's trivia question to win a great prize from our vault. Remember, only one person can win within a 30-day period. Good luck.
All right, and thanks to everyone who plays the trivia each and every week. Some great prizes up for grabs. And so far, we've given away, Pizza Hut food. We've given away Taco Bell.
iTunes stuff,
Facebook stuff. And now this week, it is a Subway gift card. Eat fresh at Subway. The way to win is at 6 p.m. on Monday, July 1st. Post your correct answer on our Facebook page. That would be facebook.com/partsinthesum. The first person to do that once the window opens up at 6 p.m. July 1st will win the Subway gift card.
Yep. Everybody likes free food.
And here is the trivia question for this week. Name the 2 former U.S. presidents who passed away on the same July 4th within 2 hours of each other. I want to thank
We
Ronnie
told you it
for
was
that
morbid.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little
It was
morbid.
a few hours. But yeah, 2
former
on the same
presidents who passed away on the same July 4th within a couple of hours of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Name those 2 former presidents beginning at 6 p.m. on Monday, and you could be this week's winner.
Yep. Everybody likes free food.
Oh, yeah.
I'll say it every time. Everybody likes free food.
Everybody likes free food. Former Gallia County resident Eric Harrison graduated from high school in 2010, moved immediately to Chicago in pursuit of a career in acting and being a comedian, and he enrolled in the Second City, the world-renowned comedy club, theater, and school of improvisation that touts a large number of successful alumni like John Candy, Martin Short, Tina Fey, Jim Belushi, Kevin Smith of the Clerks fame, Eugene Levy in the American Pie movies, the late Chris Farley. So many people. We had a chance to talk to him yesterday, and we have that interview in its entirety on our site, partsinthesum.com, so be sure to check it out. The United States Marine Corps Band going to be playing us out in just a little while with the Star Spangled Banner, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Boy, they do a really good version of that. And
I would
that's
hope so.
on the way as we celebrate America's birthday. When we come back, another treat along those lines, and we'll wrap up the show, so don't go too far.
The moment my son saw a redwood tree
It's huge!
is the moment I knew that for him,
You can't even see the top of that thing.
even the sky has no limit.
There are some moments only the forest can inspire. Find yours at discovertheforest.org. Learn about forests near you and discover cool things to do when you go. Your moment is out there. Find it at discovertheforest.org.
Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Everyone knows Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. But did you know he was also a founding father of ice cream? That's right. After sampling the creamy treat in Paris, Jefferson learned to make it himself and even wrote down the first American ice cream recipe. His favorite flavor? French vanilla. Along with ice cream, Jefferson's dinner guests enjoyed European delicacies like macaroons and macaroni, made fresh on a machine he ordered from Italy. And Jefferson's creativity didn't stop at food. He designed an improved plow for use on his farm, and a cipher for sending coded messages. And Jefferson wasn't the only founding father with a passion for innovation. Benjamin Franklin earned worldwide fame for flying a kite in a thunderstorm and inventing the lightning rod. Franklin also designed swim fins, bifocals, and an odometer. Perhaps no founding father left a longer legacy of innovation than George Washington, who as the nation's first president signed the act that set up America's patent system. Who's the only president to hold a patent himself? None other than Abraham Lincoln. In 1849, the then congressman from Illinois was issued a patent for a device that helped float boats across shallow waters. It was never manufactured, but you can find a scale model on display in Washington's Smithsonian Institute. Just one more example of the tradition of innovation begun by America's founding fathers.
Are you ready? Let's go.
HometownStation.net. We play what we like.
Well, Ronnie, I want to thank everybody for listening to our podcast again this week. If there's any suggestions that you might have, how we can make the podcast better, contact us. There's several ways to contact us. Partsinthesum.com. And
Info at Parts in the Sum if you want to send us an email. Twitter handle is at Parts in the Sum. Get to Facebook.com/Parts in the Sum. Talk to us in the group. Even call us on our new coincidentally worded number.
415-PSW News. Well, Ronnie, we're just about ready to wrap it up. We're bringing in the United States Marine Corps Band right now to usher us out with the Star Spangled Banner. But happy birthday, America, and you all have a safe and happy 4th of July. Ronnie, you have a good one.
I'll try.
Thanks for listening to Parts in the Sum of the Whole. Be sure to follow our page all week long for the latest news from all over the world. Items discussed in the show do not specifically reflect the views of our source networks and media partners. Our weekly podcast is produced by Panman Media Studios. Visit our website, www.partsinthesum.com. Copyright 2013. Educate and inform the whole mass of the people. They are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. Thomas Jefferson.